Hello there, incredible soul. Our theme of today is forgiveness. And in that case, our passage of today from the Good Vibes book of knowledge is from Proverbs 24:28 going down. This is what it says. Do not testify against your neighbor without cause, or use your lips to deceive. Do not say, I'll do to him as he has done to me. I'll pay that man back for what he did. Wonderful source. God is great at all times, and thanks to God that we are gathered here today. My friend, we shall be reacting together to videos with the pure intentions of making sure all earthlings in the whole world are united, living in peace, forgiving towards one another, and above all, loving your neighbor like you love yourself. So, my friend, kindly hit that subscribe button, like button, and join us till the end. Let's thank our Creator before we dive in. Merciful Father, thank you for this day, Father. Thank you for your grace and for your love, Father. Thank you, dear Lord, for your wonderful soul that you have joined us today. All glory and honor belong unto you, Father. Dear Lord, as we react to these videos, Father, with the intentions of spreading love, guide us and help it to be possible, Father. In Jesus' mighty name, we do pray, trusting and believing. Amen. Good vibe sauce. Let's dive in. Much love. Good vibes all the way.
Psychologists have known since after World War I that guilt and fear and a promise of belonging make propaganda more compelling than reason to most people. We've known since after World War II that non-mentally ill humans are capable of justifying evil in certain conditions. And we've known since the Cold War that conformity in a phenomenon called groupthink can be powerfully more persuasive even than one's own rationality and senses. When mixed with guilt, fear, and a promise of social alienation or further suffering, sloppy psychological states of individuals compel atrocity, raise cults, and take down families and empires alike. It may be because I'm a psychologist that I demand that my kids tether to self-righteously knowing what is always right versus always wrong in any scenario, to think for themselves, to be courageously disagreeable, back up their conclusions, use precise language in specific instances instead of generalizations, bravely speak the truth, not their truth, to adhere to those morals that are universal, and neither be compelled by fear, nor guilt, nor promise of relief. My kids watched videos of the Ash conformity experiment where people defied their own senses in order to fit in. They watched videos of the Stanley Milgram experiment where regular people inflicted pain on other people simply because they blindly obeyed authority without thinking for themselves. The Stanford prison experiment where random people brutalized others simply because they were assigned positions of power and relief from feeling less than. All of those. And as a young child, explaining that stranger danger safeguard isn't believing that others could be dangerous, but a celebration of being disagreeable and not pleasing others if it means thinking for yourself with your own good head. And when my kids were old enough to understand atrocity, they didn't simply learn Nazis are evil, but also learned guard your mind and keep courageous company, because this could be anyone, even you, in the right conditions. Make no mistake. As an agnostic, open to whatever, but nothing proven to me yet, maybe I psychotically cling to this obstinate, courageous psychology as a sort of religion. Maybe it's all that I believe will save us. Maybe because I grew up in a cult and saw the hypocrisy and dangers of loose associations and sloppy, thoughtless relief-seeking and fear avoidance. How they give rise to delusions of grandeur and then delusions of persecution. How they destroy the only force stronger than the sum of its parts and stronger than dangerous ideologies, our connections to one another. Or maybe it really set in when I worked in prisons and my clinical supervisor said, "You can't be wrong, Angelica, but you can't be sloppy. Back up your conclusions precisely," every time I handed in a report. But I know for sure this. Almost every single one of us as individuals share the exact yearnings for safe and prosperous communities, countries, and for the world. And we can only begin to approach that when we're courageous. And we not only stand up to obvious evil, but we stand up to dangerous groupthink delusions that justify evil. We can think in nuanced ways. We can repel categorical groupthink and quick all-or-nothing fixes and compelling simple ideologies. That's when we safeguard ourselves and our children and our children's children.
You want to avoid pieces that have the visible center of the tree in it, because this is most likely to crack going into the center. And you'll see examples like this, and even like behind this, you'll see it. This is going to happen to this piece, even if it hasn't done it already. What you want is not one of these pieces, so like something like this, where you don't have an exact center in it. And something that's even better is you want to see the tightest circle grain here, rather than something that's like a little chunkier like this or like that. Like that's a little too chunky. You want these tight rings. So you're gonna have the straightest boards with the least chance of splitting with something like this, with something like this. This is a little far apart, but that one's probably still fine.
Have you noticed that removing the plastic cap off your bottle has suddenly become a whole lot harder? Well, the good news is that you haven't suddenly gotten weaker. The caps have been deliberately redesigned not to screw off completely, unless you're really determined to wrench them off. Now, some people aren't happy, and they've complained about being hit in the face and want to know why the change. It's down to a new European Union law designed to reduce single-use waste. The EU says that bottle caps are one of the most common items of litter on beaches, and having the caps attached also makes it much easier to recycle. But wait a moment, the UK left the EU 4.5 years ago, so why is it still affected by its rules? Well, it's true that the UK is no longer obliged to do this, but for some of the drink companies, it's just too complicated to send different types of caps to different countries. So they've decided it's easier just to use the same design for everyone. Also, some of the supermarkets will only accept the new cap because they want to reduce litter. So you may have to put up with those new caps or just really exercise those arm muscles.
These days, you can learn basically everything you need to know on YouTube. You don't even need to go to school anymore. But there's a big problem, and it's the reason why most people don't know a single fucking thing about the world. So imagine you wanted to know about the history of the banking system, our financial overlords. So you went and watched a really long YouTube video all about the banking system.
Applied with its hidden purpose, viz. To fleece the English people in perpetuity by allowing the creation of the nation's money and means of exchange out of nothing. Edit.
See, that's great. It took you 3 seconds and you got the most important part of banking, to fleece the people by charging interest on money you created out of nothing. But the problem is you're taking in so much information so quickly, and it's just audio going in one ear and out the other, and you're not going to remember shit from that YouTube movie 5 days from now, let alone 1 year from now. And now I know 99% of you guys aren't going to do this part, but if you want the information that you're taking in to stay inside of here, this is how you do it. I was a teacher for like 10 years. My parents were both teachers. I'm telling you, this is how you teach yourself stuff. And you're not going to like it. I know you're not going to like it. But the reason why school works the way it does, the reason why teachers make you write reports and take notes and give presentations, is because in order to keep information in your brain, you need your neurons to fire in multiple ways, multiple pathways around that information over and over and over, so you build that stuff into your neurology. You can't just like watch one video and then be an expert on the Federal Reserve unless you're literally autistic. And I don't mean 2024 autistic where you're awkward. I mean like literally autistic. So what I do to retain all this information while I'm learning it is I take a whole bunch of notes. I put on timelines, I take screenshots, I highlight, and then I summarize the screenshots. So I'm taking notes on what's going on. And as you write those notes out, as you interact with the material in multiple mediums, and then as I talk about it on camera, all of those different things put it into your brain in a way where it will stay there. And it has the added benefit of you being able to go back to it if you forget anything. So this is just the system that worked for me. I use the app called Obsidian. You use whatever systems work well for you, whether it's doodling, writing in a journal, doing trick shots while you, I don't know, whatever it is, just do something that helps get that information in your brain in more than just audio visual stream of a YouTube video. Because the ironic thing about 2024 is that there's so much information and everyone is so underinformed that the bar is actually really low for being smart. All you have to do is actually pay attention to what you're learning and put it in there a little bit, do a little bit of work, and suddenly you're going to know more than everyone else in the room. And if you're wise, maybe that would not encourage you to dunk on everyone, but instead to educate, to inform, to share, to be nice. Dunking on people does not make them convinced that you are correct. It just makes them hate you. And besides, you're probably wrong anyways, because you're not that smart. And in case you hadn't figured it out by now, neither am I.
Visited an Egyptian exhibition, and one thing stood out.
Why are the baby is now 46 years old? Louise Brown was born on July 25th, 1978. The first baby that was born through in vitro fertilization in England. This is the first time that a human being was born where the egg and the sperm were matched outside the body in a petri dish. And this innovation actually was done by a gynecologist named Patrick Steptoe and a developmental biologist named Robert Edwards. What was really remarkable to me about this is that they kept going after 101 failed attempts. You would think that after like 99, you'd give up. 100, 101, they kept going. They brought Louise Brown out live on TV as a little baby and showed the world the very first IVF-derived baby. And right after that, their phones rang off the hook from people all around the world who were wondering if they could help them also have a genetically related child.
So these are Japanese construction pants, Toby pants. They're pretty funky looking. Wide at the thigh, really bunched up below the knee. We see those pants and we recognize them as a very Japanese shape. We think kimono, we think ninja. How Japanese are they? If you look at the DNA of those pants, they're as much Dutch American as they are Japanese. So in the 1600s to the 1800s, we have Dutch settlers coming to New York. These early settlers of New York are called Knickerbockers. They're named after a very popular literary character at the time. Kind of like an Uncle Sam, but for Dutch New Yorkers. And they have a very specific type of dress as well. These white pants, they are buckled below the knee. And that's also what passes for sportswear at the time. Baseball, golf, riding a bike. And these pants are also called knickerbockers after this group of people. In fact, 100 years later, in the 1950s, when they're deciding a name for the basketball team, they think of the New York Knickerbockers, New York Knicks, in reference to these early settlers of New York. At some stage, these pants, these trousers, make their way to Japan. And they're received quite well because they're very similar to a local style. These trousers called momohiki, which are used by farmers, carpenters, workwear. And I think the most crucial part of the story is that the Western version of these pants, these knickerbockers, get incorporated into the World War II military uniform. Because after the war, the country's broke. And you have all this military surplus, all these clothes that spill out into casual life, workwear. And you have a large population of young men who re-enter the workforce who are used to wearing these pants. And over the next 100 years, you get a sort of Darwinism, where these pants develop variants and subvariants. And they gain a second layer of functional meaning as well. Construction workers on scaffolding use these big pants to figure out which direction the wind is moving and navigate around obstacles because they can feel it with their wide pants. And whilst this style has died out in the West, these pants remain and become very quintessentially Japanese. You know, clothes are just clothes. Every design decision about shape, about fabric, even in workwear, is not only functional, but can be simultaneously historical, political, social. So what we think of as like funky Japanese pants can actually be traced through 300 years of design history.
One of the big misconceptions that people have is the presence of mushrooms in their yard. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, this is an example of Conocobi tenera. It's a brown spored mushroom. It's not poisonous. It's not psychoactive. It's really not a good edible, but it's an indication of an ecosystem that's vibrant. It's recycling nutrients. And so the presence of these mushrooms in your yard is something to rejoice. It means your ecosystem is healthy and alive and it's regenerating new soil.
In this one, I have a computer which has most of its adapters disconnected. Here's my Ethernet connection, no Wi-Fi. We are set to airplane mode right now. The only thing that is showing as IP addresses is my Tailscale and my Ethernet adapter for virtual machines, of which there are none. So, how is it that I'm still getting a ping, an active ping? We can stop this and we'll just go up, we'll do it again. Whee! How is that even possible? And how is it more possible that it thinks it's an Apple TV from Intel? What ghost Ethernet bullcrap is happening in my computer right now? Someone explain this one to me, because I can't.
Psalm 46:10 famously says, "Be still and know that I am God." The Hebrew behind "be still" is rapha, which means to let go, to drop something. Drop it, let it go, and know that I am God. Now, in the context of Psalm 46, this is quite astonishing because letting go seems to be like the last thing that you should be doing. Jerusalem is threatened. You have all kinds of cataclysmic events happening. So it seems like what we should do is grab hold of something. But no, God says, Rapha, let go. Let go and know that I am God. And he's not just God. He is our God. The God who promises not to let go of us. The God who promises to fight for us, to be with us, to protect us when we ourselves are threatened. So let go, be still, and know that he is God. And we can let go because we know that God will never let go of us. We can be at peace because we know that God is at peace with us in Jesus Christ. So, Rapha, let go and know that He is not just God, but the God who's for you, the God who is always for you in Jesus Christ. Know that. Know that He is your God. And because of that, let go and be at peace.
Ever notice how you're always at the center of a rainbow? Like you never see the end of one like this, but it's always just out there in the distance somehow. This is because the center of a rainbow is your head's shadow. That's why there are never any colors in the middle of a rainbow. It's why you're always in the center, because no matter where you go, the angle of your head's shadow goes with you. You're also responsible for the shape of the rainbow. How close you are to the ground determines the shape of the rainbow you see. Most of us think that a rainbow looks like this, just like one giant arch, but in reality, rainbows are actually full circles. And the higher you go, the more of the rainbow you see. Full rainbows are so rare that they actually have their own name. It's called a pilot's glory. And it's called that because you usually have to be at the height of a pilot in order to see one.
The highway water mirage, I'm sure you've seen this. Sometimes the sun bends light downward on a really hot day and makes it look like there's water on the road. Brocken spectra, if you're on a mountain and you see your shadow on a cloud below you that looks really huge, basically the sun is shining behind a person, making the shadow through the mist magnify and look huge. Sometimes it's surrounded by a rainbow ring because light scatters backwards towards you. Fata Morgana, sometimes air temperatures that are close to the horizon can bend light near the horizon, making distant objects look like they're stretched or floating in the air, or it's just ghost ships. Magnetic hill, there are places where the road looks like it is going uphill, but it's actually going downhill. So it makes you think your car is rolling uphill. Chicago skyline mirage, I've actually seen this once. Sometimes you can see a giant city across Lake Michigan, and it looks like it's floating because the atmosphere is bending the light near the water, making it look like it's floating or a little bit off the ground, and sometimes it's upside down. It's really kind of weird. Look at that. Aurora borealis. This is just the interaction between solar wind from the sun hitting Earth's magnetic field, causing pretty light. Back in the old days, there was a lot of interesting theories, like one that said that the Earth had a giant hole in the North Pole and there was gas emitting from the hole, and that's what the Northern Lights were. I really like that one. The green flash. This is actually really neat. It's actually real, and people don't think it is. It's not just from Pirates of the Caribbean. Sometimes at just the right moment during sunset or sunrise, you can see a distinct green spot that lasts for just 2 seconds or more, and that's because of the sun just barely refracting into the water, causing different colors because of the atmosphere. Or it's the soul escaping Davy Jones. Moon illusion, I bet you've seen this one too. Sometimes when the moon is really low to the horizon, it looks really big. And this can actually happen not just with the moon, but also mountains and buildings. China's floating city. No, this is not Operation Bluebeam yet. So thousands of people have said they've seen floating cities in China, and this has actually happened on multiple occasions. Some like to say that it's just NASA testing out a holographic machine to see what people would do, but more likely it's just what I talked about earlier, the Fata Morgana mirage. And this usually happens in areas of high pollution, and it basically just reflects the image upwards, and that's why it looks like it's floating in the sky. Sundog angel phenomenon. Basically, on cold days, usually up the mountains, ice crystals can bend sunlight to make bright spots on either side of the sun, and it can also create halos sometimes, or even angel wings. I would love to see this someday. Anyways, follow for more weird videos just like this. Thanks.
Who is the first person in all the Bible to declare that they had seen God? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and the answer is most likely Hagar, the woman enslaved to Sarai, the wife of Abraham. In Genesis 16, she runs away from her mistress into the wilderness, and the text, as it has come down to us, explains that she runs into the angel of the Lord, who instructs her to go back and to obey her mistress. And then toward the end of the chapter, the text says that Hagar named Adonai, who spoke to her, and she says, "You are El Roi," and then explains why she's giving God that name. And the Hebrew is a little muddled. Something has probably been corrupted along the way. But I think most critical scholars agree that this is expressing shock at having seen God and lived. And so that's, for instance, how the NRSV UE renders it. And so Hagar is actually the first person in all the Bible to claim to have seen God. Now, some people are going to say, nope, she saw the angel, she didn't see God. And that is a traditional approach to this text, but that's probably not what originally was going on in this story. See, this story and several others involving folks like Abraham and Moses and Joshua and Gideon and Manoach and his wife talk about them interacting directly with God, but somewhere along the way, there was some theological discomfort with God interacting directly with humanity. And so an editor came in and wrote the word malach, angel, before some of the occurrences of the name Adonai or the title God. They didn't do it every time, but just enough to muddy the waters and create this kind of conflated identity. Are they talking to an angel or are they talking to God? Well, there are a number of reasons to think that originally they were talking to God. For instance, in these stories, the messenger, the angel, is never doing what messengers or angels do. They're doing what God does. Additionally, the people usually express shock at having seen this entity and lived. And that's coming from Exodus 33:20, the idea that you can't see God's face and live. It would entirely undermine using the mediation of angels if it were deadly to interact with angels. And that's not something that's ever expressed anywhere. And there's also textual instability. The verses that have the angel versus those that don't differs between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then, for instance, in Exodus 3, where verse 2 says that the angel of Adonai appeared to Moses in a flame of fire in the midst of the bush, and then in verse 6, that angel says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. When we look in the Vulgate, and in Josephus' telling of this story, the angel never shows up. It's the Lord from the very beginning. And so most likely we have interpolation going on here. And I've got a fuller argument for this in my book, Adonai's Divine Images, A Cognitive Approach, which is an open access book. You can find a PDF freely available online or through my link tree. So in light of this editorial change, in the original version of these stories, we have several people who interacted directly with God and saw God's face. But the first person in all the Bible to have claimed to see God's face seems to have been Hagar, the woman enslaved to Sarai.
Did you know that there's a really interesting reason why so many buildings in Hong Kong have hollow open floors like this where it looks like a big hole? And contrary to what many people think, these structures are not there because of cultural reasons like feng shui. And if you've ever been to Hong Kong, you'll notice that these structures tend to repeat as the building gets taller and taller. And the only reason why these structures even exist is because of existing laws in Hong Kong. And I'm more or less talking about fire safety laws in Hong Kong that require buildings with 40 floors or higher to have refugee floors. And these refugee floors have to be built every 25 floors as part of the law. And refugee floors are basically bare open floors with minimum structures. And they also include a fire sprinkler system. And the purpose of these floors is to act as a place where people can hide from fire and also to wait for rescuers. And they also serve another purpose as well, acting as a void between floors. And this is really important because the hole acts as a void to prevent fire from spreading up or down the floors. And it also serves another purpose as well, acting as a hole to minimize the effect of wind on the building. And this is really important in places like Hong Kong, which are prone to typhoons. And this practice is also used in other places like India as well as Australia.
Today I learned that the French have an idiom for when they get their periods, and it's les Anglais ont débarqué. I just thought it was because the French were annoyed by English people, but it turns out that it's actually from the era of the Napoleonic Wars when the English wore red coats, and they say that when they arrived, and I mean the imminent bloodshed that was to follow. But now I just have this mental image of an English person just announcing it for me. Aunt Flo, I'm here every fucking month. You can't tell me you forgot again. Go on, love. Stop whinging, get on your rags.
Bro, can you guys tell me if I'm the only one? Every single time I eat, my nose drips. Why?
Why does your nose run when you're eating? This is something called gustatory rhinitis. And basically, when you're chewing, it stimulates the trigeminal nerve to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. This is the system responsible for salivation, but also mucus production in your nose. So some people have a hyperactive parasympathetic nervous system, so when they eat, their nose runs.
St. Peter's Basilica is so massive that it really messes with your perception of size. So for example, here underneath the dome, which was incidentally designed by Michelangelo, you can see 2 rows of letters here, these, and then the ones above. These right here are about 2 meters tall, so about 6 feet. The ones above are about 3 meters tall, so about 9 feet.
So want to talk about the cognitive bias that I think has the biggest effect on how we experience the world, and it is called survivorship bias. A classic example of survivorship bias involves this diagram. So this is a picture of a plane. It's supposed to represent Allied planes in World War II returning from battle, and the red dots are plotting the bullet marks that those various planes had on them when they came back from battle. And the purpose of doing this was that the military wanted to study where there were vulnerabilities on their planes and where they needed to reinforce them. And their plan was really straightforward. It was that they were going to reinforce the planes in the places with the smatterings of red bullet marks all over them, because that is where enemy fire was hitting. But, luckily for them, they had this guy on the study, Abraham Wald, who was a mathematician. And Wald basically took one look at this and he said, "You're doing it wrong." If you've not heard this before, take a second, see if you can figure out why. And the reason, which is blindingly obvious in hindsight, is that these are the bullet marks on the planes that came back. So these white areas, that doesn't mean they're never being hit by bullets. It means that those are the vulnerable spots. If you get hit there, you go down, you don't return. So survivorship bias happens when we mistake the data that we can see, so in this case the bullet marks on the planes that returned, for the entire data set, all of the bullet marks. And it happens literally everywhere, all the time. So when people say history is written by the winners, for example, that's survivorship bias. The records that we have about who we are, where we came from, our culture, our societies, they're the red bullet marks on the plane. Imagine that you're an archaeologist 1,000,000 years in the future and elephants went extinct long ago, they've been wiped from the record, and you find a skeleton of an elephant. You're probably never going to know that it has a trunk, because the trunk is soft tissue and it won't have left any trace in the fossil record. So when you're moving through a world shaped by survivorship bias, you're moving through a world where elephants don't have trunks. Okay, so we've done history. What about our identities? In your family, the law, the things that people talk about, the stuff that comes up at funerals, that's survivorship bias. Those things are heavily curated and they're not the totality of a family identity. Think about the things that you're not allowed to mention, the people that don't get talked about. That's the interesting stuff. And then there's social media. I've got about 1,400 edits of me cocking up various parts of this video, not posting them. People on their Instagram stories are posting a polished version of reality. We're constantly being served the surviving pieces of the digital record. So yeah, our entire perception of where we came from, who we are, and who we're surrounded by is shaped by survivorship bias. And then that doesn't even get into the day-to-day experiences we have with it. So, like, let's say I've got really out of shape and I decide I'm going to go to the gym and enroll in a class. I feel like I am the least fit person in the whole world, but I'm not. I'm the least fit person in a class full of people who regularly do exercise. And it explains how people who are really smart can go through life riddled with imposter syndrome, because every single time they do something great, they get promoted into a room full of even smarter people. We only see the data in front of us. We don't think about the filter that it went through to get there. So anyway, no biggie.
I'm a dry cleaner and I'm going to explain how hydrogen peroxide removes stains. So it releases oxygen when it comes into contact with organic materials, like stains. The oxygen reacts and breaks down chromophores, which are a part of the stain molecule that's responsible for the stain's color. Once broken down, it no longer reflects light in the same way, which means the stain is gone. To best use hydrogen peroxide, spray it onto your stained garment and let it air dry inside overnight. It takes a while, so be patient.
Did you know that Estonia became the 24th CERN member state just last week? And it made me wonder who really owns CERN? Well, celebrating its 70th anniversary this year, CERN's member countries, which include France, Germany, and the UK, pay costs towards CERN's programs and sit on the lab's governing council. Full membership also allows a country's nationals to become CERN staff and for its firms to bid for CERN contracts. The lab also has 10 associate member or 4 countries or organizations with observer status, such as the US. So I was like, okay, hypothetically member states kind of own CERN, but then I looked a little bit deeper and I found the CERN Council, right? I don't know if anybody knows about this. The CERN Council is made up of delegates from all of those 23 member states, now 24. And each member state has 2 delegates on the council. The council is the highest authority of CERN and is responsible for all major decisions, including policy, determining an organization's policy on scientific, technical, and administrative matters, strategic programs, annual goals. Then I wondered, well, who are the delegates? Who are the presidents and vice presidents on this council? And lo and behold, I'm not very surprised at what I found. Mr. Rabinovich. Does anybody know who that man is? That right there should tell you enough, but if it doesn't, he was a postdoctoral fellow at Fermilab. And of course, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, but Fermilab is what's important here, right? Fermilab aims to become a world center in neutrino physics. It is the host of the multi-billion-dollar deep underground neutrino experiment now under construction. And ongoing neutrino experiments are Icarus and Nova. The completed neutrino experiments include MINOS, Icarus. Now, if we start talking about that experiment here on TikTok, I'd probably have this video taken down. So instead, I'll probably do a video on that on X. But does anybody know what neutrinos are capable of? Does anybody know about the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory that exists in Antarctica? Because God, I've tried to talk about that on numerous occasions, and every single time I do, my video gets taken down almost instantly. But let's just say that there was a special whistleblower a couple years ago that released a lot of information about the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory. And when I decided to dig into it and do my own research, I found a lot of stuff. And I'm sure everybody remembers that anomaly that kept appearing above Antarctica, right? I'm not going to say too much, but I'm sure everybody knows about what goes on in Antarctica. And let's just say that on the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory's website, they just so happen to mention the New Zealand earthquake that happened in 2011, which might be something that whistleblower mentioned as well. You can go watch the interview for yourself and you can form your own opinion. But I'm just saying, I did a deep dive on this. I did a video a couple months ago on this, and I made it very plausible. Plus the fact that CERN literally has a Shiva statue, people. You know Shiva, the god of destruction? I mean, literally, people, come on. And have you seen their opening ceremonies? I mean, I'm just saying, think outside the box here, okay? There's a lot that exists in our reality that we don't believe in because we don't see it as being realistic. So many human minds are not open to that aspect of reality actually existing. So many have remained stuck in their primitive ways. And you see this right here? This doesn't represent what you think it does. Our consciousness was reset. It was deferred away from our primitive ways. And now somehow, we've just allowed ourselves to go backwards. But hey, who am I to tell you how to live your life, right? I'm sure you enjoy working a 9 to 5 until you reach retirement, right? Think outside the box here. But boy, when I found this, everything really started to make sense for me.